Hello again and welcome to part 2 of our Improving Wrist Injury Pathways presentations, and this one is to summarise the results of our mixed methods work, which are basically exploring current pathways and particularly stakeholder perspectives on wrist injuries. So the work we did was mixed methods, and we did this at 10 NHS centres which we sampled in order to get a variety of different types of pathways. We did a lot of structured interviews of both patients and staff who were integral in running the wrist injury pathways, and we did some pathway mapping at each centre. This table gives you an overview of the 10 centres which we sampled. A really diverse mix in terms of catchment population, which was pretty variable and obviously linked to the size of the hospital, some being tertiary referral units and some being district general hospitals. It's a real mixture in terms of the kind of catchment in terms of ED, emergency departments and minor injuries units, some having just an emergency department while others had a large number of minor injuries units referring into them. And then in terms of pathway types, obviously this is a summary and it was actually a bit more complex beneath the surface, but there was a great diversity in terms of some sites offering early MRI to the majority, whereas a fair few sites offered MRI in a delayed fashion after repeat clinical assessment. So this slide basically sums up why stakeholders wanted change. The patients frequently mentioned that they just wanted to know what was wrong. They didn't like the period where they didn't know what was going on, and they worried while they were waiting for further investigations. One patient said, "It was pretty awful because I didn't know what was wrong." There was the frequent thought of what's going to happen if I get a scaphoid that doesn't heal. People talked of what can go wrong when a scaphoid doesn't heal. For example, one staff stakeholder said, "There's the horrible thing about people who have had bad wrists as a result of the missed scaphoid." And one patient with a non-union said, "So I'm quite open-minded about the fact the hand might not ever be the same. Now I'm just left with this wrist which I need to adjust to." Staff also talked about the medical legal consequences and how litigation for missed scaphoid fractures was a frequent reason for wanting to improve their wrist injury pathway. The next slide summarises where this drive for change led to, and this was the win of early MRI, with one staff member even describing it as a triple win, which kind of signified the benefits to patients, to clinicians on the ground, and also to the health service more broadly. Patients were really positive about their experience of early MRI, and it very much linked into this worrying and waiting, in that as soon as they had their MRI they were really grateful to get a prompt scan and a prompt result, and then they could plan what was then going to happen next. One patient said, "I think by having that diagnosis it's reassuring in terms of you can then have the medical treatment that's required to make it better." Another patient said, "If they can get that scan, then everyone's just reassured and they can get on with things better and everyone's lives move forward quicker, don't they?" Staff were very positive about the benefits it provided to patients, but also the benefits it provided to staff. One staff member said, "It works for the pushers because you're going to have an answer, and it works for the pullers, the receiving people, because you're going to get someone packaged when they come through the door." And this kind of translated into more certainty for the clinicians, which made their lives easier, but also reducing the clinic footprint for the hospital, which obviously translates through to economic savings for the organisation. So that then led to the themes relating to how do you actually then achieve early MRI in a pathway that works. And we condensed it down to these 6 themes. So you can see here, simple works. One staff member said, the simpler it is, the reality is a lot of people don't really do this very often, so keep it simple. The more complex a pathway was thought to be, the more things that could potentially go wrong and the more tricky it was to communicate. You need the access to the MRI and you need the prompt reporting. One staff member said, once you've got the scans, then making the pathway and the education bit, that's actually quite easy. Implying that getting that MRI capacity was absolutely crucial in terms of the first step. Safety of the pathway was felt to be important. Staff were often fearful of patients getting lost in the system. One staff member said, you wouldn't want patients to get missed and lost in that system. You know, that's a bit of a fear for us. Data and audit was seen as key, not only to prove the need for improving the pathway, but also to spot problems and to improve process. One staff member said, our process has been iterative. We've done it, we've spotted areas that remain weak or that have become weak because of unforeseen issues, and then we've addressed them. Another staff member, for me it's all about the data, and it's not about doing sort of research projects, it's audit. You need everyone engaged, one staff member said. So because everyone was engaged and everyone could see that it was going to be beneficial, there were no barriers. You need to protect your staff. One staff member said, she burnt out because she was trying to do exactly what you were just saying. She was trying to do clinical work, do her master's degree and do extra management stuff, and she just plummeted. She hit rock bottom. Another staff member said, there has to be some protection of the staff to ensure it continues, allocated admin time to ensure that they can do all of that monitoring. And then team communication. One staff member said, communication is vital just because there's so many areas that are involved. Another staff member said, and also you can make it really visible in the department, so I've put sheets up everywhere. I've put it on the shared drives. This slide summarises the pathway mapping work we've done, and although it looks pretty clunky and complex, this is not even half the story in terms of the nuts and bolts and the complexities of individual pathways. You can see, looking down the columns there for the 10 centres, that pathways were variable in terms of where the MRI was offered from. In centres that offered early MRI, some of them could only offer it to their ED patients and not their MIU patients. The mode of referral for MRI was variable, obviously different electronic systems. In terms of having a stated pathway for this group of patients, most centres did, but 3 didn't. The mode of referring to the pathway was variable. Some used paper, some were electronic, and obviously the virtual fracture clinic was often a common portal of access. The type of MRI scan was variable, some centres using limited sequence, some not using limited sequence. The team and the lead was variable. The way the MRI result was then actioned was also variable. And then the sites that used MRI, some of them had a pathway for specific actions for specific MRI results, and some didn't. And beneath this, there was a whole load more complexity that I'm not going to bore you with, but clearly pathways are pretty damn complicated. We gathered the documents that different sites had, including the flow diagrams and the SOPs for their pathways, the referral pro formas where these existed, as well as the patient information sheets and patient letters, as well as patient hand and wrist exercise sheets. Interestingly, we looked at what data was routinely gathered, and perhaps unsurprisingly, no centre had a mechanism for gathering data in real time. Only a minority of centres actually audited regularly, and of the sites that audited regularly, there was quite a significant lag time between the actual audit and when those patients had passed through the pathway. Kind of key to take home from this is that it does appear we could be doing a lot better with data, but obviously it's much easier said than done to anyone that's worked in the NHS using electronic systems. There's a whole load of complexity in terms of how these are set up and how these work, and it's sometimes not necessarily easy to do things that appear fairly simple at first glance. So that's a summary of what we've done so far, and I think there's a lot more detail to that beneath the surface, but I hope the summary has been useful and you've enjoyed listening to that. Thanks.